Well, the presumption of innocence is at the core of Australia's justice system, but a new study shows the way courts are designed could be playing on jurors' prejudices. An experiment with a fake terrorism trial has found that the likelihood of a jury bringing down a guilty verdict may depend on where the defendant is placed in the court. And as Jason Om explains in this exclusive report, it's triggered calls for legal reform.
At this high-security court in Sydney's West, a mock terrorism trial has begun.
All rise.
The defendant is charged with conspiring to plan a bomb attack on Australian soil.
The accused is not the dangerous jihadist the prosecution would like you to believe.
More than 400 mock jurors took part in the experiment and were presented with the same witnesses and the same evidence. But in the three separate scenarios, the accused terrorist appeared in different locations. In the first scenario, he sat at the bar table beside his lawyer, common in US courts. In the second, in an open dock. And finally, in an enclosed glass dock. Researchers from a group of Australian and overseas universities are asking which scenario will more likely lead to a guilty verdict.
Well, people think they can detect their own prejudices. In fact, all the psychology evidence says they can't, and you need to do a randomised controlled trial to see how people actually behave as opposed to how they think they behave. So that's why it's so important to do an experimental study like this.
So you don't think they can separate the difference?
No, I think they can and they can certainly talk about it and sound very articulate, but in fact, for something like that, it's largely subliminal.
These jurors were involved in the glass dock scenario and insist that when deliberating, they focused solely on the evidence.
I made an assumption, he's a Muslim man, I bet you it's going to be something to do with terrorism. But then I didn't really look at him because at first I thought, oh, he looks a bit sad. But I thought, oh no, don't start feeling any emotion about this, just look at the facts.
My verdict was guilty.
And why?
I felt like the circumstantial evidence really did point towards a guilty verdict.
Appearance meant nothing to me. I glanced at him just to see who the defendant was, but I was looking at the facts, just plain and simple.
But what did they think about the glass dock?
Behind the glass, I didn't really think anything of it.
Initially you did feel like there was a reasoning behind him being sort of secluded and kept away from all of us. It did make you think that there was either danger or violence or something, you know.
You could take the inference that it was perhaps he was there for our safety, or perhaps it could be the other way around. Perhaps they were worried about other people coming into the courtroom to try and harm him for the alleged crimes.
The experiment was carried out earlier this year, and now the results are in. When the glass dock was used, 60% of jurors delivered a guilty verdict, compared to 47% for the open dock and 36% for the bar table. Jurors were also asked what they thought about the defendant.
The impressions were that the accused was more dangerous, more violent and more threatening in the glass box.
The results come as no surprise to former Supreme Court Judge Anthony Whealy, who presided over the high-profile terror trial involving 9 Sydney men, including the now notorious Mohammed Elamar and Khaled Sharoof. In that case, he agreed with defence lawyers to remove the glass to ensure the trial was as fair as possible.
The tension is there because the government who build the courtroom want to see them used in the way they were constructed. Corrective services want to downplay the possibility of any risk of somebody escaping or causing some havoc in the courtroom. The judge's task, however, is to make sure someone gets a fair trial, and that involves, as I've said, eliminating or reducing prejudice and bias wherever it's possible.
The lead researcher David Tate points to the cases of journalist Peter Grester in Egypt and punk band Pussy Riot in Russia as extreme examples of how defendants can be presented in court. He says in Australia, glass docks should be removed altogether.
They undermine the presumption of innocence, they're more likely to lead to conviction, and they fundamentally undermine the right to a fair trial.
David Tate says Australia should look to the United States for a fairer arrangement.
The US, they sit at the bar table beside their counsel, and that's been going on for about 100 years, and that includes defendants who are known to be mass murderers, extremely dangerous, and not the sort of person you would want to associate with. but nevertheless they do it.
I think more and more we might think about whether people need to be in a dock area at all. We've really done it because that's the way British courts were constructed hundreds of years ago, and we've followed suit. But whether there's really any need for it, except, as I say, in an exceptional case, I doubt very much.
The researchers now hope their work will lead to changes to the design of Australian courts to strengthen the principle of innocent until proven guilty. Jason Om, Lateline.